"End this tonight," my son whispered, lifting his glass. In that breath, the floor of my life gave way. The wine tasted wrong, the room tilted, and on the kitchen spice shelf I saw a tiny bottle with a neat label, Digitalis. By the door waited a black bag with a notary stamp and a printed deed naming my house without my consent. It wasn't an argument about money anymore. It was an attempt to erase me quietly with paperwork and poison. I dialed 911 with shaking hands and chose daylight over denial. What followed was not a brawl, it was a method, evidence sealed. Bank locks flipped. A recorder humming against my ribs while I learned that love without boundaries becomes permission, and that a home is more than lumber, it's a promise. This is the story of how a father faced the most intimate betrayal, how law and resolve outlasted manipulation, and how keeping the house meant keeping himself and two children's future intact. If you've ever wondered where the line is between helping and being used, start here. With a glass raised, a label you can't ignore, and the moment you decide the truth, we'll have witnesses. I kept the radio low enough the weather could talk without taking the room. The announcer measured the cold and promised wind that would comb the Blue Ridge. In my kitchen, the air still remembered cinnamon, and the old kettle wore a ring of heat like a band. I reheated yesterday's coffee and watched the window glass fog. Since Lila's heart quit 2 winters ago, the house has learned my tempo. Slow drawers, soft doors, a single fork at the edge of the oak table she scarred with 1,000 recipes. Her wooden spoon still leans in the crock, stained the color of nutmeg. I touch it when the room forgets itself, the way a man might touch a scar to read the weather. My name is Conrad Hale. 69 years sounds like a long wire run until you look back and find it spooled at your feet. I spent 4 decades on poles and steel, hands in rubber, boots on cross arms, pushing back storms one insulator at a time. The habits don't retire when you do. I still inventory rooms, trace lines, listen for hum that should not be there. The house sits on a hillside outside Asheville, a cedar box with a porch that faces tulip poplars. Morning light walks in and falls across the wedding photo Lila never let me move. The fridge ticks when its old seal relaxes, and even that small click feels like company. The phone rang at an hour when decent people fold towels. The screen blinked Brent, and for a beat and a half I set the mug down to let the name cool. He is 40, now too old to call only when something has to be lifted, yet that is the rhythm he favors. I thumbed the green circle and braced a shoulder against the counter as if wind were coming. He started with the sigh of a man rehearsing bad news. "Dad, I need real help," he said. He called it a hedge, a strategy, a position, like the words could cover the hole beneath them. When I asked him plain what hole he meant, he counted it. 72,000 lost on options and 35,000 taken off his roof in a home equity line. He said a date like a cliff, January 10th, and beneath it I could hear the gravel of collection. "They'll come by then," he added. He reminded me that June needed orchestra shoes and Theo had a field trip, the way a fisherman salts a lure so the trout will hold it a second longer. He talked about scale. He talked about reality. He made the word practical sound like a virtue and a threat. Then he offered a plan that wasn't a plan for me at all. I could sell the house, he said, and finally give myself a break. There were places with elevators and hot meals, people who would knock at noon with a tray so I could stop wrestling with firewood and roofs. I could move into something built like a soft glove and let my bones rest. He praised the math of shrinking, the tidy grace of storage units in single rooms. He said the market would smile on a place like mine. That memory was expensive square footage. I let him talk because silence is a tool, too. My hand cupped the mug like a battery and I watched the steam go thin. He said the word shrine, as if a table pocked with Lila's knife strokes were idolatry instead of proof that meals got made and winter got outlived. He said I didn't understand scale, that my numbers were old, and his problem was modern. I could hear his smile, the one that shows up when he thinks the answer is already loaded. No, I said, not a performance of no, not a maybe with a coat on it, but the word itself. The house is not for sale. I said Lila's spoon leans where it leans, and that has a price the bank doesn't print. I said I am not moving into a hallway with handrails so somebody else can rescue themselves from a bet. The line went quiet enough that I could count the relay clicks in the furnace. Then he came back sharper. You're sentimental, he said. You're choosing a building over flesh. He said a man my age should be grateful to trade roofs for safety and past for practicality. I have worked in ice that put a glaze on rungs and made every step a bargain. I have leaned out over roads at midnight to throw a knife switch with my shoulder while lightning combed the sky. I know the difference between fear and caution. I said so. I told him again that the house stays. He exhaled like a tire losing air and let words out that wanted to bruise. Then the line gave me my kitchen back. After, I stood with the mug half gone and the room moving the way rooms move after hard weather. My hand trembled enough to make the light on the stove wobble in the trim. Out the window, the trees shook their black fingers at a sky the color of pewter. I opened the drawer where we keep what anchors us, birth certificates, titles, photographs, and lifted the deed to the top so it could see the air. I do small practical things when the big ones refuse me. It is how you keep a line from sagging. On the wall calendar, the red squares crowded the month toward Christmas Eve. I tried to picture the table without tightening and could not, so I practiced breathing until the chest let go. I wiped the counter, set the mug in the sink, and clicked the radio up one notch. The announcer's voice had turned toward warnings for bridges and high country. He promised a frost that would write its name on every windshield in Buncombe County. I shut the kitchen light and listened to the boards answer with their soft complaint. The house held the dark the way a hand holds a photograph. I stood in it and let the room decide what to keep and what to let go, and when it finally sighed, I took that as permission to sleep. Morning came thin and metallic, the kind that turns breath into ribbon. The kitchen smelled of coffee and last night's cinnamon, and the radio gave the cold a number I tried not to memorize. I wiped the oak table and lined the salt and pepper like insulators. Old habits send a man to inventory his borders when a storm whispers its name. The furnace coughed, settled, and the window made a soft clicking sound as frost traced the corners. I told myself out loud that today would be for small work, clean, stack, confirm. I baked a short loaf and walked it down the hill to Arturo Alvarez. He opened his door with that steady cop posture and a face that could carry either mercy or citation. We stood with steam between us from the bread in the morning. Truth or comfort, he asked. Truth, I said. I told him about Brent, the options, the line on the house, the date that felt like a drop. He listened without flinching, the way men do who have filed too many reports with blood on them. He called it by its name. Elder financial abuse often wrapped in the paper of practicality. He said pressure loves a holiday table. Then he took a pamphlet from a basket by his boots and tapped the title with a thumbnail. Group meets Thursdays, he said. Call if any paper moves on that deed. Don't sign a thing while your chest is hot. Oh. On the walk back, the cold brightened and the trees gave their small talk in the wind. I set the bread pan to soak and stood a moment at the sink until my hands warmed. The phone lay on the counter like a tool I had been pretending not to need. I hit Brent's name before I could rehearse my tone. I told him I could pull $18,000, cash I kept for roofs and furnaces. I said it plain so he could hear the limit as a kind of love. He breathed like he was shielding a smile. "Dad, you don't understand scale," he said. 18 is pocket change. Then he ladled on the familiar gravy, June's orchestra fees, Theo's trip, the cheap holiness of guilt. I let it run off. I said the house is off the table, and so is any talk of selling. He shifted to the voice he saves for meetings smooth as laminate. We need a real solution. I told him he had a calendar and a conscience and should use both. When we hung up, I could feel his disappointment working the edges like a hand looking for a weak board. I stood quiet long enough to hear what the house thought of it. A man alone must take counsel where it is offered. The clock in the hall shaped a minute, then another. My phone buzzed. It was June with a recording from the school piano, 8 bars of Carol of the Bells, notes careful as stitches. The sound found my ribs and worked them loose. I remembered Lila placing June's little hands on middle C and telling her to listen for gravity in the chords. For a breath or two, I considered calling Brent back and making space where I had drawn a line. I didn't. Love and surrender are not synonyms. I wrote that on the back of an envelope and tucked it in the drawer with the coupons so I could trip over it later. Small work, I reminded myself. I opened my laptop and set bank alerts for any withdrawal over a sum that used to scare me. I turned on two-factor for the accounts I still treat like toolboxes. I went to the county website and registered for property notice emails, the kind that cough when a deed is touched. I wrote the hotline from the pamphlet on the white card Lila once used for pi ratios and slid it under a magnet shaped like a cardinal. Then I brought the family folder to the table and laid out the bones, birth certificates, insurance, the deed, a copy of our old trust, the names of people who would answer the phone if mine fell out of my hand. The order calmed me the way fresh wire calms a line. The pamphlet lay there a long time. I set it beside our wedding photo and read the title again until the words lost shape. I took down Lila's crystal glass and polished away a month of dust, then set it back where it catches the late light. It wasn't worship. It was a form of inventory, a way to say that some objects have standing orders. I told the room quietly that the house stays. Saying it to wood made it heavier, more real than any vow given to a dial tone. By afternoon, the cold had sharpened. The radio warned of black ice on bridges and urged chains in the high country. I put a small fire in the stove and let the ticking metal count for company. I thought of Christmas as if it were a negotiation. If Brent wanted me at his table, I would go for the children, and I would bring pecan pie because that is what a grandfather brings. But I would not sign, would not discuss roofs or market timing, would not pretend a home can be solved like a spreadsheet. I said those 3 would-nots aloud and felt the room draft around them and settle. Dusk came early, thin and pewter. I stood in the doorway and listened to the layered breathing of the hill, cars far off like distant surf, a dog complaining 2 streets away, a raven counting the minutes from a pine. I put the pamphlet in the family folder, closed the flap, and stacked the whole thing neatly on the edge of the table where my hand would find it in the dark. No signatures, while the heart is sore, I told the quiet. The house made its little answer in the rafters, and I believed it. Then I turned the radio down to a murmur and watched the window find its frost again, lines of white sketching borders I would honor when the holiday pulled at them. Christmas Eve began with butter and flour under my fingernails and the kitchen breathing like a small engine. Pecans cracked with their dull winter music, brown sugar hissed in the pan, the room filled with nut scent Lila called winter's handshake. I rolled crusts the way she taught me until the dough lay smooth enough to take a thumbprint. While the pie set, I wrapped gifts, a puzzle book for Theo, a tin of colored pencils for June, and the blue scarf Lila finished the year before her heart failed. Before I left, I checked the thumbnail recorder Alvarez had pressed on me. The button was small as a pepper seed, press and hold to wake. I held it until the tiny light sighed and went dark, then tucked it into my shirt pocket. I filled the steel water bottle I carry like a habit and slid it beside the pie in the cooler. When a line may be tested, you test your gear first. The drive south put me between Blue Hills and Pewter Water. Daylight skimmed off the French Broad. Fields wore a skin of frost that looked like sleep. A choir on the radio laid rafters of harmony across the road. I kept the slow lane and watched for black ice where bridges rose into shade paler. By the time Greenville showed, my face remembered the grandfather who listens more than he speaks. Brent's cul-de-sac wore Christmas like a catalog page. Tidy wreaths, warm lights, a plastic deer by the mailboxes. Mara opened the door before my knuckles fell a second time. Her smile was arranged, her eyes kept sliding past mine. The children took care of the rest. June's hug was fierce enough to wake bone. Theo's was quick and clumsy, an airplane docking. I surrendered the small packages and set the pie on the counter. Brent came in with the stage-ready warmth of a host. "Tonight is just family," he said. "No money talk." "I'm sorry for the other day," I nodded. The kids didn't need an inquest. They needed dinner that felt like every other December they could remember. At the entry bench, half hidden by a shoebox, sat a black leather bag stamped in clean lettering, "Mobile Notary." A strip of yellow sign here flags peeked from the zipper like small tongues. "Friend of Mara's," Brent said lightly, following my glance. "She might swing by to sign a lease thing." I didn't answer. The bag sat there like a spare shadow. Cloves thickened the air. In the pantry hallway, I eased a hand to my pocket and brushed the recorder to be sure I'd started it. Its quiet told me it was working. I angled myself where I could see both the bag and the kitchen door without looking like a guard. Brent poured red into stemware and joked about undercooking prime rib. I lifted my steel bottle and let its cold lip remind me what was mine. My phone ticked. I checked the time and saw a subject line that bled all color from the room. Buncombe County Register of Deeds. Document received. I opened it with lineman care. Quit claim deed. Received for recording. Grantee. Brent Hale, Revocable Trust. My ribs closed and the floor came closer. I screenshotted, archived, killed the screen. The mulled wine on the back burner smelled suddenly medicinal. I considered leaving, take the pie, drive north, call Alvarez from the first gas station. The idea rose, took a breath, and sat down. June's laugh rang from the living room. Theo argued rocket fuel. Mara checked the oven as if time could be baked thinner. I stayed. I would eat with my grandchildren, watch where the notary bag went, and keep my hands on my own tools. Brent carved a little too carefully, as if a camera followed his wrists. He filled silence with easy jokes. "I'm glad you came, Dad," he said, mostly for the room to overhear. I answered with an old story about my first winter on the line, a pole so iced I could see the sky in it. The tale bought me minutes to map sight lines and exits and the places a bag could be moved without notice. Mara set out plates like she was diffusing something. Her eyes flicked door, kids, clock. I told June I'd help sharpen the pencils after we ate. "I made you a card," she said, and I slipped it into my pocket without reading. A man banks warmth for the hour after a storm. The house made the sounds a holiday uses to seem ordinary. Jazz brushed under carols, forks tested plates, someone laughed too loud at nothing. From the stove the spiced wine sent waves into the hallway, and old reflexes came to heal. Don't drink what you didn't open. Don't sign what you didn't read. Don't answer a knock you didn't invite. I tightened the cap on my bottle and took a long pull that tasted of steel and tap. I slipped the phone back against my chest and felt its faint repeated buzz, the county system confirming receipt. The recorder sat quiet as a conscience. I chose a chair that let me face the entry and the kitchen, a lineman's choice, keeping the line of sight clean. The pie cooled near the window, smelling of a better night. Prime in 5, Mara said, voice too bright. Brent raised his glass to the children and offered a soft sentence about family, and I let it pass like a train I had no ticket for. The bag by the door waited, patient as a plan. I repeated the terms I'd set that morning, here for June and Theo. No papers, no house talk, no exceptions. The words held like knots you tie without looking. When the timer chimed, it sounded like a warning bell on a high line. Brent reached for the carving knife, Mara for the ladle at the stove. I watched the doorway over their shoulders and the black bag that did not move, and the screen of my phone that did not light. The night wore a holiday costume, and under it something else had taken a seat. The table glowed under a runner stitched with red berries, the prime rib shone with buttered edges, jazz brushed the air. I chose a seat that let me see the kitchen door and the black notary bag by the entry bench. My steel bottle stood at my right hand. Rules held. When Brent lifted his glass, I lifted mine enough to catch the light and let it down again. The rules I'd set that afternoon clicked into place like a harness finding its notch. No strange drinks, no talk of the house, no pen in my hand. Brent offered a toast about family and second chances, words rounded for company. I let the rim touch my mouth and tasted nothing. To a peaceful Christmas, he said. I nodded and reached for the bottle, metal cool against my palm. The children talked at their usual speed, school plays, homeroom, a class hamster with opinions. I matched their tone with a story from '83, a poll that rang like glass in the wind. The room laughed in the right places. I counted movements. Mara's path from oven to counter, Brent's carousel between carving board, plates, and door, the blank space where a person could step and I wouldn't see it. Heat gathered until the room felt a size too small. The mulled wine gave off its heavy sweetness, clove first, and then orange. My pulse tracked the oven's fan. I excused myself to cool off a minute and slipped down the hallway. The bathroom mirror offered a face I knew from nights on call. Alert, a little pale, measuring conditions. I locked the door and called Alvarez. House looks like a magazine, I murmured. Bag by the door, stamped mobile notary. County emailed a quit claim received. I'm steady, but I'm not drinking. He let the silence answer first. Then, good. No signatures. Don't touch their paper or their props. If you see anything off in the kitchen, take a picture with your head. Stand near a door, I thanked him and ended the call. The fan's soft whir sounded like a distant transformer. Back through the kitchen, I let the room move around me, a body in a current. On the spice shelf behind cinnamon sticks sat a small dropper bottle. The label read Digitalis leaf extract. Herbal tincture, the font friendly enough for tea. Pale liquid clung to the glass. I have worked too many years not to respect labels and the ways they lie. Digitalis will make a heart play a different beat. I did not touch it. I marked its place in the grid of the room, third jar from the left, shoulder high, 6 feet from the simmering pot of wine. Mara stepped in with a ladle and a smile that couldn't keep a straight line. Her eyes flicked across the shelf and away. Need water, she asked. I'm set, I said, tapping my bottle. We stood for a brief politeness. She stirred once, twice, the wine sending up a bright breath, then moved back to the dining room. I watched the dropper bottle until the timer chirped and told the house to act happy. I returned to the table and slid my chair a half pace to the left, a small correction that put the kitchen and the entry in the same slice of view. I cut my serving small and let the children talk. Brent kept up the performance with care, carving in smooth strokes, complimenting Mara's roast, asking Theo about a science project he already knew. He was good at it, the gentle theater of a man wanting a witness. Maybe we all do, once we learn how a room softens when given the right lines. The body has its instruments even when the mind thinks it's in charge. Mine reported heat, a thread of lightheadedness, a metallic echo that could be nerves or kitchen air or memory. I took slow breaths and let the bottle reset me. I spoke only when the children asked and let the adults use the bright sentences. The notary bag stayed by the door, squarish and patient, the kind of object that plans its moment and then arrives on time. I set a plan as a sketch. If anyone asked for signatures, I would stand, gather my things, drive. If the bag moved, I would note the hand that moved it and the time. If my body spoke more urgently, I would dial and walk outside and name the house to the dispatcher the way a man names a crossroads. Until then, I would bank hours with my grandchildren and keep the peace they thought they were defending. "Prime's perfect," Brent said, and a line of relief ran through. June reached for Pepper and touched my sleeve with the back of her hand, a small lightning that grounded me. I told her we would sharpen her pencils after pie, and she smiled as if the future had agreed to be reasonable. The oven clicked a cooling note. Jazz traded places with a softer carol. Outside, cold leaned on the glass. I let my gaze travel the room the way it would have traveled a substation yard. Posts, gates, switches, clearances, kitchen door open, hallway clear, entry bench, bag unchanged. In the living room, a framed photo showed us from a better December. I placed it in the mental map as I placed the dropper bottle. Not for sentiment, but because a mind works best when a moment's furniture is named. The timer chimed again for my pie, and a small cheer went up. "Save room, ah," I said, hearing Lila in my own voice. Brent looked up just then. His eyes were soft enough to pass for safe. For a second, I could almost pretend we were a version of ourselves that had not learned certain words. The softness lasted long enough to teach me. When a face leaves no place for error, something is hiding under it. I kept my hand near the recorder's button and breathed as if the air had weight. The night smiled like a postcard. The timer still rang in my ears when I stood, excusing myself with a hand to my collar as if the room had simply run warm. I slipped through the swinging door and let it settle until only a sliver of gold from the dining room cut the tile. In here, the light was clean and hospital white. The pot of mulled wine made a slow, patient sound. On the spice shelf, third jar from the left, shoulder height, sat the dropper bottle where I had fixed it in my mind. Digitalis leaf extract, herbal tincture, 6 feet from the steam, 2 steps from the sink, close enough to be convenient if a man wanted convenience. The notary bag remained where I could still see it, angled on the entry bench beyond the hall like a promise that had learned to wait. I kept my steel bottle under my palm, the recorder quiet against my ribs, my shoulder near the door jamb. A man keeps a margin the way a lineman keeps a glove between himself and what can curl his hair. The door behind me moved and closed with a careful finality. Brent slid in and let the latch find itself. He did not bring the host's face with him. The friendly weight left his mouth. His eyes went flat enough to float on. "I got an email," I said, voice low and square. "Quit claim received for recording. Grantee your revocable trust. Digitalis on the shelf. Notary bag by the door. I didn't point. I didn't touch. I counted my own pulse until it steadied into something I could use." He held my look for a beat and then switched to the language he prefers, the one with clean edges and no fingerprints. "You're choosing wood over blood," he said. "We need a solution on the right scale. This," he cut a small circle in the air, "isn't about feelings. It's about math and timing." "Math doesn't need a tincture," I said. "It's herbal, Dad. People your age take drops for nerves all the time." He let his eyes note the simmering pot, then the tiny bottle, the way a passerby notes landmarks without stopping. "You came here to be reasonable. So be reasonable." I pressed my thumb into my shirt pocket and felt the recorder's nub. I held it long enough to plant a flag on the tape. then let my right hand fall to the counter and use my left to ghost over the face of my watch. The emergency sequence hummed under the skin, a silent circuit. Alvarez would get a pin on a map and a short string of text, SOS Kitchen, address. I watched Brent's hands the way I would watch a line humming under ice. "You keep saying scale," I said. "I keep hearing erasure." He smiled the way a salesman smiles at a car with the wrong engine. Wealth Fellowship teaches stewardship. Assets should move to where they can be useful, not sit locked in sentiment. This house is a box of stuck value. Transfer it into the trust, and it finally works for the family. Mara's friend is on call. A notary makes it clean. We can end this tonight. "End this tonight?" I said, giving the words to the pocket microphone. Third jar from the left. Label reads Digitalis. Pot of wine at a light simmer. He inhaled and let the mask come back half an inch. "Don't be dramatic. You're warm because you're worked up. Take a sip, sit down, stop fighting the obvious." I don't drink what I didn't open. I don't sign what I didn't read. I don't discuss the house I took a breath and felt it go the distance. I am not dramatic. I am specific. He shifted a hip against the counter and let one hand find the silver lip of the drawer where the knives sleep. The drawer came out a finger's width and he closed it again, a move with no point except to mark that he could. Behind the door, the table sang a soft chorus of forks. "Think of June and Theo," he said. "Think of what you could fix by making one mark. We file, we refinance, the pressure releases. You stop pretending that a building is a person, and we go back to being a family." "Family does not set traps," I said. "It's not a trap," he said. "It's stewardship and timing. The papers are ready, the notary's waiting, the trust is set up. All we need is your signature, and this ends." I let the recorder have the sentence whole. Then I let the room have my silence. I looked at his hands and counted the little tremor he was hiding with careful stillness. I looked at the bottle on the shelf and made myself memorize the exact tilt of the meniscus. I looked at the door and measured whose shoulder owned it. From the dining room came June's voice, muffled by the door, offering to set out plates for pie. Mara answered in a careful key that tried to sound like any other December. The pot breathed, the fan stitched the air in a thin line. Somewhere beyond the cul-de-sac, a siren shaved the night. Too far to mean anything yet, close enough to make the walls notice. He heard it and tried to smile. "It's Christmas Eve," he said. "Let's not make a scene." "You already did," I said. "You submitted paper with my name and your trust on opposite sides of a line." "It's called efficiency," he said. "If you weren't so stubborn, none of this would be necessary." "Necessary to whom?" "To the people who depend on me," he said. "To your grandchildren. To the budget that keeps a roof over their heads. Sign and we can stop pretending the past owes you more than you've already taken from it." "You brought a notary to a holiday dinner. You staged a room like a brochure. You parked a bottle where an old man might mistake medicine for kindness." I felt my voice grow quiet enough to bend metal. "I'm not mistaking anything." His hand left the drawer. It opened and closed into a fist and then a palm. He tried the softer tone again, an actor switching plays mid-scene. "Dad, please, don't turn this into the kind of story we can't come back from." "It turned," I said, "when you filed before you asked." The siren came again, closer, splitting the neighborhood into pieces you could count with your teeth. He swallowed. The practice light returned to his face so fast it looked painted on. He reached for the door as if he had always intended to check on the roast. "Stay," I said, not loud, not asking. He stopped because the part of him that likes command still answers to it. We stood in the clean light with the gentle pot and the wicked little bottle and the door that would not forget who closed it. "Papers are ready," I repeated. "For the tape, and for myself. Notary is waiting. Transfer to your trust. End this tonight. You're twisting my words, he said. I'm lining them up, I said. Across the room, the glass caught a flicker of color, a brief blue pulse like winter lightning, then a red that lifted itself over the counter in a slow wash. Tires ground to a stop outside. Voices took shape in the distance, the way thunder takes shape when it remembers where it is. Brent's breath shortened and went shallow. He reached again for the handle and found it slippery with nothing. I set my hand on the table to keep my own from showing me up. In the thin space between us where a blessing might have lived in a different version of this night, I let out a thread of sound meant for the recorder and for the wood that knew me. "The house stays," I whispered. Red and blue slid across the grain like two long veins, and the door behind him discovered it could open from the other side. The knock hit hard enough to shiver the glass, and a voice cut through the carol beyond the door. "Police!" Red and blue washed the cabinet faces, quick and cold as river light. I slid to the side of the kitchen doorway with both hands low and open. "My name is Conrad Hale," I said, shaping the words so they would stand. "Possible poisoning, attempted deed fraud." The door opened to uniforms and winter on their coats. I stayed near the jamb so the sightline to the dining room held steady so the children would not have to meet what belonged in this room. "Hands where we can see them," the first officer said, already peeling Brent from the threshold by the elbow. The second leaned past me and called, "Ma'am, please take the children to a bedroom and close the door." The music tried to continue and failed. I sat when told, palms up on the table, and named the objects out loud the way I had rehearsed for the recorder pressed warm against my ribs. Third jar from the left on the spice shelf, shoulder height, label reads Digitalis leaf extract. Pot of mulled wine at a light simmer about 6 feet away, black mobile notary bag on the entry bench in view of the hall. The officer repeated each item for his body cam the way linemen call out each step on a live switch. They worked the scene like a practice crew. Photographs first, wide frame, close frame, the path between shelf and stove, the cups on the counter, gloves on, bags open. One officer coaxed the dropper bottle into a pouch. Another drew 2 vials from the wine with a sterile pipette and sealed them. A third isolated the glass Brent had poured. The bag left the bench with a zipper's soft animal sound and a tag looped through its handle. When they asked what brought them here, I held up my phone and showed the screenshot. Buncombe County Register of Deeds, quitclaim deed received for recording, grantee named as Brent Hale Revocable Trust, and then the SOS log on my watch. I told them the recorder was running. They nodded like carpenters checking plumb. We kept the talk short so the facts would stand tall. I gave the order of the evening. The apology at the door, the promise of no money talk, the notary bag, the email, the bottle on the spice shelf, the pressure for a signature, the exact sentences I had repeated into my pocket. Brent tried to slide back into the version of himself that persuades. "It's an herbal tonic," he said. "This is a misunderstanding." I'm trying to keep our family afloat. The officer with him didn't litigate from the kitchen tile. "Sir, stop," he said. "Anything you say can be recorded. We'll take formal statements at the station." Then the question that doesn't let you hide, do you want to press charges? 1,000 pictures moved across one breath. June bent over a treble clef, Theo explaining model rockets, Lila setting 4 plates as if steadiness could be built from dishes. "Yes," I said, "for attempted poisoning and for fraudulent transfer. I'd like a victim advocate looped in. I asked for mercy where it could still work. If you can, take him out without the children seeing." The officer's nod was small, the kind that means we will try. Medics slipped through and changed the room's gravity. Stickers found my chest. A cuff took my arm and counted. A handheld machine printed my heart in little teeth. Heat in the skin, a light head, a metallic echo at the back of the tongue. I reported each like a man reading a meter in sleet. No alcohol, I said, only my water. They recommended observation at the hospital. I said yes once we knew the kids were walking away from the edge of this night. One medic rested a cool palm on my shoulder, the universal grammar of "you are not alone." Mara appeared at the hall mouth with her hands clenched in an apron that didn't belong to any party. She said she didn't know what the tincture was, that Brent had handled the drinks, that a friend with a stamp was supposed to stop by for a lease. The officer separated her and took notes, asked the notary's name and arrival time. None had arrived. The bedroom door clicked shut and the house layered itself. Children behind wood, adults under lights, neighbors on dark porches watching color spill across a cul-de-sac. It ended where it needed to. "Brent Hale," the officer said, "you're under arrest on suspicion of attempted poisoning and property fraud." The rights were read again, each word placed carefully where later would need it. He looked at me instead of badges. "You're tearing this family apart," he said. "Family doesn't need traps," I answered. It did not feel like victory. It felt like throwing a knife switch after weeks of brownout and hearing the line take load. They moved him toward the front, past the bench where the bag had waited, past a wreath arranged to reassure strangers, through a door that could no longer pretend it didn't know his name. I stayed with my palms on the dented grain while another officer wrote the chain that would hold the night together, labeled bottle, wine vials, poured glass, notary bag, screenshot, SOS record, pocket recorder. She wrote a case number on a card and slid it next to my water bottle. The number looked small and exact, the way coordinates look before you stand where they point. "Social services will contact you about the children," someone said, a voice both gentle and administrative. "We can coordinate with relatives." I gave them the number for Mara's parents from our old address book and felt a strange relief at doing a normal task, the kind a day is supposed to be made of. The stretcher's wheels spoke on the tile where a family had stood an hour ago. As we rolled down the hall, I saw June's arm around her mother's waist and Theo's mouth shaping a question I could not hear. The door opened to bare trees, breath, lights, the gathered neighborhood that always pretends not to know your business and tonight cannot. The siren found its voice, then lowered it for the turn. On the cot, I set my hand flat over my chest and felt the recorder's square warmth through the shirt. It was not bravery, it was proof. Proof that I meant the words I chose when I said the house stays, when I chose law over comfort, naming over denial, daylight over the neat shadow of a plan. The ceiling lights trembled with each joint in the road, the way beads pass one by one through a hand, and I let the motion carry me toward what comes next, where consequences choose their shapes and the storm turns into a record someone will read by morning light. The emergency room had winter noon brightness, all scrubbed air and steel. They parked me under monitors that wrote my pulse in green teeth while a cuff squeezed the storm from my arm. Heat eased to warmth. The dizziness flattened into a line I could walk. A resident studied the strip and said my rhythm was steady enough. No acute poisoning, not from what they could see, but blood would tell them better by morning. I signed nothing but the consent that lets a nurse touch you kindly. The recorder stayed in my pocket until an officer logged and sealed it. I watched the label go on like paint you can live with. A detective came with a clean notebook page. He repeated the placeholder charges: attempted poisoning and attempted deed fraud. He wanted the clean run of events at dawn when sleep smoothed the edges, and I agreed. A woman from the victim office joined us, a presence like sun through glass. She laid out choices without pushing: restraining orders, court advocates, numbers to call when 3 a.m. proves louder than noon. She slid a one-page checklist on protecting assets and identity. Half its boxes I had already checked in the kitchen. I gave Alvarez's number as the person who answers when my voice is thin. A social worker arrived with the news that mattered most. June and Theo were with their mother at her parents' house, out of sight lines, wrapped in a normal night they could trust. I asked her to pass along a promise. I would call in the morning and talk about nothing more complicated than pencils and rockets. She smiled at that, a professional warmth that has saved more than once. Alvarez came shouldering snow and purpose. He produced a pocket spiral and made a list with the bluntness of someone who loves you enough to be practical. Change the locks, add a smart doorbell, turn on fraud alerts with all 3 credit bureaus, freeze change of address with the Postal Service, email the registrar's office to flag the file. We divided the tasks into now and first thing, and the weight in my chest rearranged into ballast. No signing, no solo meetings, he said. Everything through counsel or the detective. I repeated it so the room would keep me honest. My phone found a new way to make noise, a cascade of alerts I invited 2 days ago, a password reset attempt on my checking, a new device trying the gate, then a call from the bank's fraud unit about an external transfer request for $24,500. 2-factor stopped it. Deny and lock, I said. I asked for in-person only wires, a branch passcode only I knew, and a freeze on online access until I showed ID at a desk. Alvarez wrote down the names and times like a stenographer for common sense. The detective nodded from the doorway, hearing a thread tie off. News traveled the halls thin and opinionated. A neighbor texted to ask if I was all right. I answered with the advocate's line, working with law enforcement, appreciate privacy. It felt like lacing a boot you intend to walk in for months. I would not try this case on a phone. I would not make the children's world smaller. Night released me like a knot you finally find the turn on. The physician cleared me with instructions to rest and return if anything sharpened. Alvarez drove, stopping for deadbolts and batteries. The hillside was quiet at my drive. The porch light made the snow look like paper. Inside, the house breathed cedar. I laid my palm on the table and said the word I whispered under sirens. Stay. It's a small word, but it reached the joist like a blessing. We worked in companionable silence, him on the locks, me on the list. I pinned 8 lines of mourning to the refrigerator, call the district attorney, the bank manager, the register of deeds, leave a message for the pro bono clinic, email the school about the children, forward case numbers to Mara's parents, pull chain of custody copies, charge the spare phone for storm days. The list steadied my hands. When the house settled, I made tea weak enough to taste like calm and sat with my notebook. I drew a diagram the way I sketch a substation. Sources, loads, breakers, ground, house, trust, deed, accounts, phones, court, children. Under it, I wrote Lila's sentence for hard seasons. Keep the house and you keep yourself. It sounded less like romance and more like instruction. Boundaries had not only saved walls, they had saved the part of me that knew how to hold those children without turning love into permission. The phone dinged. An email from the advocate with tomorrow's times and a victim impact template for the prosecutor. I filed it, then walked the rooms like a lineman at dawn, eyes soft, ears open, checking for hums and heat. The furnace thumped and grew quiet. Outside, the porch threw a pale wedge across the snow. I folded a blanket over the armchair and let it take my weight. The phone charged within reach, not because I expected an emergency, but because preparation is an easy mercy. Sleep came on the second try, carrying a promise of work more than rest. Morning would ask for patience, for signatures that healed instead of harmed, for witness in plain clothes. The storm that started at a table would travel to a desk and then a bench, and I would meet it there out of duty. When the kettle clicked, I let it, and when the house creaked its winter complaint, I answered in the same voice. We are staying, we are staying, we are staying. I woke to the neat rectangle of paper on the refrigerator, 8 lines written in block letters that looked steadier than I felt, and brewed coffee. The house held the quiet of a workshop before tools begin. No signing, no solo meetings, I told the room, repeating Alvarez's rule until it rooted again. By 8, I was on the phone with the advocate. We confirmed times, detective first, then the prosecutor, then a half hour with a pro bono attorney who works elder financial abuse like a trade. She reminded me of my rights, the no-contact order we'd request, and courtroom patience as spine. Bring copies, she said. Let your notes do the heavy lifting. I packed the folder I assembled in the night. The screenshot of the quitclaim received, the SOS log from my watch, photos of the spice shelf and the bottle, the case card with its numbers small and exact. At the courthouse, I swore to a written account that began with the apology at the door and ended with red and blue across the kitchen. The prosecutor explained the road ahead, arraignment within 72 hours, a recommendation for no contact, a request that the judge order Brent to stay away from me and my address. The detective verified that no notary had arrived. He wanted IP logs from the register's portal and timestamps to show who clicked what and when. I handed over the recorder's copy and kept a duplicate in my bag like a spare fuse. The pro bono lawyer met me in a small room with a conference table that had seen its share of maps and grief. He split the problem into 2 circuits: criminal, attempted poisoning, and attempted deed fraud. Civil, stop the quitclaim from ever finding a permanent index, then void it with prejudice. He drew boxes: injunction, quiet title, affidavit of fraud, and gave me words to carry: coercion, incapacity, misrepresentation. He suggested I update my will and build a defensive trust with spendthrift language so that any future gifts would serve June and Theo and not the mistakes of adults. From there, I called the Register of Deeds and asked to place a fraud flag on the parcel. The clerk's voice was brisk and kind at once. The quitclaim showed as received, she said, not recorded. A hold could sit on it while the investigation moved. She scheduled me to sign an affidavit of property fraud, asked for the case number, and sent an email that landed like a wedge under the door frame. At the bank, I asked for paper over screens. We set in-person-only wires, added a branch passcode, printed the log of last night's block transfer. I left with a manager's card and an understanding that not all risks live online. Then I froze credit at all 3 bureaus, locked postal change of address, and reset 2-factor 2 keys. The world makes rooms for thieves. You learn to lock the hall and the doors. The advocate sat 2 tables away while I met Mara for 10 minutes that felt longer. Children first, I said. We keep their world simple. She nodded and wrapped her hands around a paper cup as if it were winter. She admitted pressure, the bag, the talk of signing, the pot that made the room smell like clove. I didn't know what that bottle was, she said. I should have asked. I told her cooperation mattered more than punishment and that any visit to my house would be supervised and free of money talk. She agreed. We carried the silence that comes when love shares a table with wreckage. In the afternoon, I drove to the community center because a flyer in my pocket told me Healing likes company. The circle was metal chairs and ordinary people with steady hands. A retired teacher described a grandson with a scheme. A widower spoke of a reverse mortgage he escaped at the last hour. I said little and listened, taking a toolkit home. A template for event logs, a list of hotlines, a simple guide to preserving digital evidence without breaking its chain. Not every rescue needs volume. Back at the house, Alvarez arrived with a box of deadbolts and a doorbell that can see farther than I do. We set zones and alerts and laughed when a squirrel auditioned for intruder. He checked the camera angles and the screws on the strike plates. I called Mara to confirm a weekend visit with the kids at my place, under eyes that know what to look for, under a rule that bans money talk. The idea of crayons on my oak table made me feel taller by an inch. At dusk, I opened a folder and wrote 2 pieces for tomorrow. The request for a no-contact order in words as plain as fence posts. The first draft of a victim impact statement, sentences matching damage to facts, sleeplessness and vigilance, the cost of locks and time and fear, how a kitchen becomes a contested border. I did not write about vengeance. I wrote about safety and the line between help and harm. I thought of Lila and her sentence for hard seasons. Keep the house and you keep yourself. I had heard it as romance. Tonight it sounded like geometry. A boundary isn't a slammed door, it is a beam that carries weight so the rest of the room can hold beauty. The house is more than cedar and screws, but cedar and screws are what hold a memory where children can still find it. Near 9, the prosecutor called to confirm arraignment and asked me to speak briefly about risk and need. I can do that, I said. I laid out a suit on the chair and stacked my documents in a binder that closed with a satisfying click. On the porch, a new lock settled into old wood with punctuation. I turned off lights room by room, left the entry lamp on for luck, and let the night hold us without argument. The fight had moved from stove to courthouse. The house stayed. I would too. We reached the courthouse early, the hall already humming with shoes and paper. I wore a plain suit and carried my binder. Affidavit, kitchen photos, the SOS log, and the county received screen for the quitclaim. The advocate found us a bench. Alvarez checked his watch and said nothing. I rehearsed a line under my breath. Safety, distance, the house remains. Arraignment turned the personal into procedure. The prosecutor rose with a précis. Probable cause for attempted poisoning and attempted deed fraud. Toxicology pending. Corroboration by recording and physical evidence. Across counsel table, the defense asked for a soft bond and a promise that would have sent me back into guesswork. The judge's voice was steady and close to kind. Bond set with conditions. No contact of any kind, stay away radius around my address in the schools, surrender of passport and any weapons, and, at the court's discretion, electronic monitoring. The judge spelled them out. No calls, texts, emails, or third-party messages, a 500-foot perimeter around my home and the schools. Surrender any firearms within 24 hours, passport to the clerk. Pre-trial services to verify. The clerk read the order back, each clause like a rung in the dark. The request to loosen it failed. The risk was too current, the pressure on property too plain. I breathed, not in relief so much as in alignment. When they called for a victim input, I stood. Your Honor, the risk is real, I said. My sleep, my accounts, my home, and my grandchildren's sense of safety have been affected. I asked for absolute legal distance. I named the facts and only the facts. The quitclaim email, the notary bag at the door, the words "in this tonight," the Digitalis bottle on the shelf. 90 seconds lived their whole life and sat down. The judge nodded and folded my request into the order like a brace into a wall. The hall outside was the same and different at once. Mara, beside the advocate, kept a respectful span of tile. We agreed that visits would be supervised by a third party, Sinner if needed, Alvarez if not, and that nothing with a $sign or a parcel number would enter the room. For the children, I said, only the children. She agreed, eyes on the floor and then on the door that led outside into the ordinary day. Our civil line moved next. The attorney filed a motion for a temporary injunction to stop the quitclaim from taking on permanent ink. The registrar's office confirmed the hold remained. We drafted quiet title and void deed pleadings built on coercion and misrepresentation, attached my sworn affidavit, and cross-referenced the prosecutor's case. The clerk stamped a preliminary date. I signed updates to my will and established a defensive trust with spendthrift terms so that whatever I eventually handed down would hold shape for June and Theo rather than dissolve in other people's fires. At the bank, the manager and I met across a desk that smelled faintly of toner and coffee. He confirmed in-person only wires, stamped the branch passcode, and handed me a printout of last night's blocked attempt. We reviewed the alert tree like linemen map a feeder. From there, I called my insurer to add a camera and doorbell rider, aligned beneficiaries with the trust, and filed the receipts where I could find them. Neighbors texted. I answered with the sentence I had chosen. Working with authorities. Thank you for privacy. The support group emailed a tidy packet, event log template, hotline list, guidance on storing copies on an offline drive, and a reminder to date every page as if a stranger might read it. I wrote today's date in the new log and let the pen slow my pulse. By late afternoon, the house sounded ready for children again. Mara walked June and Theo up the path, and Alvarez waved from his truck before he ran an errand that kept him within 10 minutes. We sharpened pencils, built a stiff-winged plane, and taped their cards onto the refrigerator so court dates would not be the only paper it held. June asked where to hang the blue one, and I pointed next to the grocery list. Dinner was soup and grilled cheese. The topics were school music, a science fair, volcano, and whether snow would hold until Saturday. No courts, no money, no houses. Just a table doing what a table is for. After they left, I closed the binder on the day's new confirmations. The prosecutor emailed the preliminary schedule, and the investigator set a time for an additional statement once the lab reported. My attorney reminded me to avoid any direct contact, to back up documents in 3 places, and to polish the impact statement for the next hearing. The work felt clean, the way a well-wired panel looks when the cover goes back on. Dusk brought a color that makes winter honest. I tested each lock in turn and watched the new camera settle. The binder lay flat on the counter. Out on the porch, I let the cold clear my head and said what I say when I need Lila near. We kept the house. It wasn't triumph, it was balance. Inside, I opened my notebook for Chapter 10 and began to write in block letters the message I want on the first page. Boundaries are love that thinks ahead, not walls that refuse it. The morning would ask me to say it out loud. Tonight, the house said it back in cedar and quiet, and I believed it. I woke before the furnace stirred and set the notebook where the sun will find it first. Last night's words waited like hardware. Boundaries are love that thinks ahead. I dated the page and stacked 8 lines under the heading in block letters, each a simple action I could lift. Report quickly, record faithfully. Ask for help early. Choose paper over screens. Freeze what you can. Keep copies in 3 places. Say no to urgency that isn't medical. Tell the truth once. Let the record carry it. The list looked like a ladder. I could feel my weight on each rung. My phone chimed with envelopes that belonged to daylight. The register sent a certified note. The administrative hold stands and an appointment for my affidavit of property fraud. The prosecutor sent the next dates and a line about appearing by video if snow outran the plows. My attorney replied with a 5-word spine, no contact means no contact. I slipped the papers into the binder until it closed quiet. Justice is a process, not a door that falls open at the first knock. You learn to keep your coat on and bring water. I wrote the part I had been circling since the kitchen. Love is not conscription. I can love a son and still refuse the role of rescue line for choices I did not make. Help is accountability with sunlight. Complicity is generosity without edges or breaks. I wrote it twice so my hand could teach my head. The house gave me a low creak in return, a timber sounding its age and its faithfulness, the kind of sound that keeps time. I heard Lila's old wisdom in it and answered so the air would know where I stood. I keep the house and it keeps me. Before noon, I went down to the lawyer's office to sign what would carry into the next season. The defensive trust gained spendthrift ribs. Beneficiaries on policy and bank fell into line with the same names I set aside at the table with crayons. In a quiet room, I wrote a letter to June and Theo for a day when they are ready to read about the choice I made. I told them protection sometimes looks like standing still while another runs in circles, that love has hands strong enough to hold the line, and that one Saturday we will build a small circuit and watch a lamp wake because we respected current and path. I dated the envelope and set it into the safe like a seed you do not rush. Thinking of Brent no longer felt like leaning over a well. Two truths can live together. I love the boy who learned to ride between yellow lines in this driveway. I will protect myself from the man who tried to turn a home into tinder. I wrote a policy for my own heart. Forgiveness is a bridge he must help repair with remorse, counsel, restitution. Until then, the river stays wide between us. Evidence remains evidence. Time is not a solvent, it is an audit. Afternoon slid into chores. Alvarez tuned doorbell zones and tightened a hinge that whined when weather changed. I replaced a bulb above the sink and felt the room tick brighter. We moved June's blue card beside the grocery list. On the counter, I set a tin of sharpened pencils for the weekend and rinsed the pie dish I will fill again when air smells like cut grass. I opened windows for 5 minutes so the house could trade breath with the day. The breeze brought cedar and a rumor of creek water. It felt like right, not risk. The community center hosted its evening circle, and I went because habits grow or shrink. They asked me to read the 8 lines I wrote at dawn. I read them plain. 3 people asked for a copy. I gave them my extras and added a small coda. Ask 3 questions before you sign. Write the time beside every memory. Call sooner than your pride prefers. A volunteer invited me to speak next month to seniors who call themselves stubborn with a smile. Tell them I'm stubborn too, I said. The useful kind. At home, the mail truck left one more stitch in the seam we are closing, a printed confirmation that the fraud report was entered and linked to the case. I slid it under the binder clip and felt the whole thing gain a fraction of weight, the way a roof feels when the last shingle finds its place. No drama, just a quiet click where there had been draft. The children arrived at the last light with their mother and a bag that had crayons peeking over the top. We launched a water rocket and whooped when it tried to reach Asheville without clearance. We ate chicken soup and bread and passed the salt like it was the most important thing 2 hands can do. Nobody said court or house. Theo explained venturous, and June taped another card to the fridge door because the first looked lonely. The kitchen sounded like it had lungs again, and the table kept our elbows and our faith in place. Night touched down like a careful plane. I stood on the porch with my palm on the door jamb, feeling the grain rise where winter dried it. The new lock answered with a tidy click when I checked it, then a softer one when I left it alone. Keep the house, keep yourself, I said, almost a whisper, almost a song. Choose daylight, call things by name, walk with the law. The words went into the wood the way words do. Maybe they will be there on a day I need reminding. Maybe they will be there when June and Theo are older and trace their fingers along this edge. I went inside and copied the message I owe the world into my notebook. Boundaries are not walls against love. They are love shaped by foresight and held to a standard. If you are caught between affection and duty, build the beam before you hang the picture. Record what happens. Ask for help. Carry proof until your hands stop shaking. Let the house you guard learn to guard you. Then leave the porch light on for whoever is ready to learn the lesson without the same pain. I set down the pen and listened. The house answered in cedar and warm air and a clock that had decided to keep perfect time again. In the quiet after a storm, what remains is not the noise but the choices. Justice is rarely a single moment of triumph. It is a series of steady doors we open, documents we sign, and lines we refuse to cross. Healing works the same way. It is not forgetting but remembering with clarity, naming harm for what it is, and then setting practical guardrails so goodness can breathe again. There is a difference between help and surrender. Love without boundaries turns into permission. Love with boundaries becomes a shelter. We learn that saying no at the right time is a way of saying yes to safety, truth, and the future we want for the people we cherish. We learn that a home is more than lumber and keys. It is a promise we keep with ourselves. And when the threat comes from familiar faces, the work is not to harden but to get honest. Write things down, ask for witnesses, invite daylight and the law to stand with you. Accountability does not erase love. It gives love a shape strong enough to bear weight. Forgiveness, when it comes, can meet us at the bridge, but only after repair begins on the far side. Until then, boundaries stand like beams. They are not walls against affection. They are affection that thinks ahead. Thank you for spending your time here. If something in this ending stayed with you, tell me what it was in the comments. I read every one. And if you'd like more stories told with care and clarity, please follow and subscribe so you don't miss what comes next. Your reflections shape future chapters, and your presence helps keep the light on for the conversations that matter most.